The worst case scenario is that you end up creating enough debris that it's not cost effective to depend on space. Now, that may take a long time, but because it's a non-reversible process, once you've reached a certain threshold where you're generating debris from these collisions faster than it can be cleaned out, so it could just continually get worse unless you do something drastic.
If we continue operating the way we do today, we will have a disaster in 50 years and 100 years.
A higher risk of impact means higher insurance premiums, and the cost of insuring today's active satellites is around $20 billion. More importantly, aside from the material costs, astronauts' lives are also at risk.
We were aware of the existence of debris when we were spacewalking. In a human spaceflight, we had really this ethic of not leaving anything in space, except if we had to for safety reasons.
The International Space Station has to frequently manoeuvre to avoid some 12,000 larger pieces of debris that are constantly monitored. These larger pieces of debris measure at least 10 centimetres wide, just like SwissCube.
After the launch of SwissCube, the Space Center decided to create a program to develop technologies that would help us remove debris from space. The challenge for Clean Space One is to go up there and rendezvous with SwissCube and then grab it and then bring it down to enter the atmosphere. So the technology is to bring that small spacecraft and have the rendezvous are not technologies that you can find off the shelf. At EPFL, we're developing micro and electric propulsion systems, so systems of propulsion that push ions. There are several other technologies that will be needed because SwissCube was a 10 by 10 and Clean Space One won't be that much bigger. It's not a multi-million development, it's a university-based development.
Therefore, we need very specific sensors that allow for a very large dynamic range. And afterwards, we need to process it, and we need to do it in real time in order to feed it to the capture.
That's why Mickey wants to make space clean again.
それをきれいにどんどん宇宙をきれいにしていかないと我々の生活が脅威となっている存在なんです。
Step 1. Map the mess. Agencies like NASA track the big trash, but right now no one's really looking out for the small pieces.
地球から観測ができなくて、どこにどれぐらいのサイズのデブリがあるのかっていうのが分かってない。
While Satellite 1 maps the small stuff, Satellite 2, nicknamed ELSA-D, will sweep up the big stuff.
今考えているのは磁石。
Really? Just magnets? Mickey's team will launch the satellite as close to the selected piece of junk as possible. Special cameras and sensors will get even closer, and magnets will do the rest. Then it'll be all programmed to come back to Earth where it will burn up on re-entry.
Satellite collisions would trigger a domino effect, creating a whole bunch of debris which causes more collisions, creating more debris. The first accidental collision occurred in 1996, when a French satellite was struck by a piece of a rocket thruster that had exploded 10 years earlier, severing its stabilization boom, and for the first time, demonstrating how entangled the orbital environment has become.
We know that space debris is a global problem, and that calls for global collaboration. And this collaboration is done, of course, in scientific areas, but also among agencies. And one example is the Interagency Debris Coordination Committee, IADC, where the major space agencies work together on defining the appropriate space debris mitigation technologies, forecasting the evolution of the environment, and also exchanging data and information.
ESA, a founding member and one of 13 space agencies on the committee, is also hosting the upcoming virtual European Conference on Space Debris from its site in Darmstadt, Germany. Scientists, engineers and industry will discuss the best ways to approach the problem and how to make space more sustainable. Agencies are currently tracking 28,000 space debris objects, And ESA is also developing laser tracking technology and AI-supported automated collision avoidance systems to reduce the number of false alerts for potential collisions. The aim, however, is to act now and tackle space debris before it's too late.
And there are some new rules in place for some constellations about your launch schedule. And when you apply for spectrum through the FCC or ITU or anyone, there's a strict schedule that you have to hit to maintain that licensing. So if you only launch a certain amount of satellites and you don't launch them all in 6 or 9 years, depending on which rule it is, you could get capped at a certain number of satellites. So, somebody like Amazon could only make it partway through their constellation before they have their license pulled down to a lower number, which kind of goes in with that same thing that you're talking about, that all of this notional stuff that we're looking at here, there's a lot of change that might happen, but, I think this probably, as someone who runs Celestrak, this probably scares you with the amount of data that you're kind of multiplying here.
Absolutely. There's going to be a lot of people looking to understand what's going on, and the ability to be able to portray it is going to be a bit of a challenge as well, right?
Probably going to have to get a couple of new servers for you.
Well, that would be nice, but just to be able to do things like conjunction assessment, for example, is going to become increasingly more difficult as the number of objects go up.
And now we're starting to see some Chinese companies that have been talked about in the past as putting up constellations. But of course, we don't have a lot of visibility into what some of those companies are planning in China. They haven't been particularly public yet with their plans. So that's another factor here as well that we don't know about.
And this is the first time you're seeing this visualization.
Yeah, I've never seen this. I heard you talk about it a couple of times when you were in the work, but it's much more overwhelming than I expected from your description of it.
Yeah, There's a lot of stuff being added, and it looks pretty mesmerizing almost when you look at that globe like that. But we're pretty full up already, and we're not done with the video. There's still a couple more years to add on some more satellites.
People are developing improved systems to track all that space debris. Others are holding out hope for some future fix, like using lasers to deorbit or move debris. But that's not the best we can do to begin solving this problem now, which is what makes this group of unfunded enthusiasts so inspiring. So let's go help them help all of us.
Currently, over 128 million objects larger than a millimeter are orbiting the Earth, transforming the space around it into a junkyard. These objects range from inactive satellites to flakes of paint. But even a millimeter of cosmic junk traveling at extremely high speeds can be catastrophic to many satellites that connect us around the world. Indeed, a fleck of paint was enough to damage a window on the International Space Station in 2016. So where does all this space junk come from? Why is space junk dangerous? And most importantly, are we doing anything about it? We have been sending satellites to space for over 60 years. So far, we have sent over 11,140 satellites in Earth's orbit. Out of these, 3,372 satellites are currently active. The rest are inactively floating in our orbit. The number of satellites has increased drastically over the past few years. In 2020 alone, 1,283 satellites were launched into lower Earth orbit. This is the highest number of satellite launches in a year to date. Now the low Earth orbit is about to become even more crowded. Over the next few decades, SpaceX is hoping to send a constellation of 42,000 satellites. Amazon's Project Kuiper, OneWeb Corporation, China's Hongyan, and Canada's Telesat are also planning on placing thousands of satellites of their own in the Earth's orbit. All that space traffic can lead to a disaster. The first documented collision involving space debris happened in 1996, when a French satellite was struck and damaged by debris from a French rocket that had exploded a decade before. In 2009, a U.S. commercial satellite, Iridium-33, collided with an inactive Russian communications satellite, Cosmos 2251, at a speed of 22,300 miles per hour. The collision created 2,300 pieces of space shrapnel, which now pose a threat to other spacecraft in low Earth orbit. This was the first known case of two satellites colliding catastrophically in space. Now, with tens of thousands of satellites traveling around 17,000 miles per hour, the chances of these satellites getting close to each other are a lot higher. Collisions between high-speed objects in orbit can create thousands of pieces of debris. This could result in a chain reaction where more and more objects collide and create new space junk in the process, to the point where Earth's orbit becomes unusable. The Kessler syndrome, coined by NASA scientist Donald Kessler, describes this phenomenon. How can we stop this orbital junk-generating chain reaction? Dragging parts of space junk down into the Earth's atmosphere, where the frictional heat of re-entry will burn them away, could help. In 2018, a satellite called Remove Debris was able to successfully deploy a net around a dummy satellite, simulating a technology that might one day capture spaceborne garbage. In another technique, the satellite used its onboard harpoon to puncture a target panel that's about 5 feet away. The European Space Agency awarded a contract to ClearSpace, a Swiss startup, to retrieve a 220-pound piece of rocket debris that had been orbiting Earth since 2013. Scheduled for 2025, this mission will utilize 4 robotic arms to capture the debris. However, these methods are only useful for larger pieces of junk orbiting Earth. There isn't a way for us to pick up smaller pieces of debris, such as bits of paint and metal. All we can do is wait for them to re-enter Earth's atmosphere naturally. If nothing changes and the amount of debris continues to grow, they will pose a risk to future space missions. It's only a matter of time before more collisions occur, making it nearly impossible to clean up the low Earth orbit. Without innovative solutions, we'll have to rely on a network of ground and satellite-based observatories to watch and monitor the skies.